Welcome to part 1C, and I'm going to assume that you've been following along and you've already listened to A and B, and I will jump right into this. Chapter 7, Kant's Ethics, Duty as the Compass of Reason, the Moral Law Within, Practical Reason, and the Architecture of Duty. How do we orient ourselves when the mind hits the absolute limits of its own architecture? And let us begin by asking, what remains when the scaffolding of absolute theoretical certainty is stripped away? If we cannot deduce the ultimate nature of the cosmos, the immortal soul, or the existence of God from the comfort of an armchair, how do we know what to do when we wake up in the morning? Theoretical reason has reached its limit. It stands at the edge of the unvoyageable gulf. But Kant's philosophical epic does not end in resignation. It turns now to a new dawn, the realm of practical reason. We are shifting from asking, "What can I know?" to the profound commanding question, "What should I do?" The transition from the first critique to the second is a fundamental shift from the is to the ought. Picture the moral landscape before Kant arrived. Some thinkers grounded right and wrong in the divine commands of theological antiquity. Others, like the emerging utilitarians across the English Channel, measured morality by the cold leisure of behavioral outcomes. Into this varied and precarious terrain, Kant steps with a claim for the absolute sovereignty of the rational agent. Genuine morality springs neither from authority above nor from the calculation of consequences below, but from the very structure of reason itself. The sovereignty of the good will. To discover this structure, we must strip away everything contingent. In his groundwork of the metaphysics of morals, Kant identifies the sole thing in the universe that can be called good without qualification, the good will. Let us visualize a bustling marketplace. An inexperienced child walks into a shop with a handful of coins to buy a loaf of bread. The shopkeeper knows he can easily shortchange the child without consequence. He chooses to return the exact correct change. But we must ask, why did he do it? If he was honest, simply to maintain his reputation and protect his business, he acted in accordance with duty. His behavior is socially correct, but this action has absolutely no moral worth. It is merely a calculated prudence. Moral worth belongs only to the individual who deals honestly because the moral law commands it, even and especially when it fiercely conflicts with his own self-interest. A good will is not a matter of feeling good or possessing a kind, empathetic temperament. It is a will that acts strictly from duty. The categorical imperative, the geometry of ethics. If the good will is the engine of moral action, the categorical imperative is the track. An imperative is categorical because it is an unconditional command, a definitive must that does not depend on your personal appetites or desires. Kant provides us with a rational procedure for testing our autonomy, beginning with the formula of universal law. Quote, act only according to the maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. Close quote. A maxim is simply the subjective principle of your action, the specific rule you are choosing to follow in a given moment. Kant's test for this maxim is pure logical non-contradiction. This formulation serves as the rigorous geometry of ethics. Take the ultimate moral glitch, the false promise. Imagine you need money and decide to follow the maxim, I will lie to secure a loan I cannot repay. If you universalize that rule, demanding that every rational agent lie when they need money, you create a world where the very institution of promising ceases to exist. The maxim logically devours itself. Reason rejects the lie, not because it causes bad outcomes, but because it is logically inconsistent with a shared world of rational agents. The second formulation brings the human dimension into sharp focus. Kant commands us to act so that we treat humanity, whether in our own person or another, as quoting, always at the same time as an end, never merely as a means, end quote. This is the bedrock of human dignity. Every rational being is a person, possessing intrinsic worth, not a thing with a mere price tag. Consider modern dilemmas through this lens. If a software engineer writes an addictive algorithm under the maxim, maximize user engagement at all costs, that code fails Kant's test entirely. It treats the user as a conditioned object to be psychologically prodded for profit, rather than a rational agent to be respected. Kant demands we design our lives and our societies for autonomy, respecting the moral law within each individual and thereby sustaining the kingdom of ends, a regulative ideal where every person is both a sovereign creator and a subject of the universal moral law. From the inner duty to the cosmopolitan law, while Kant's foundational ethics focuses fiercely on the internal purity of the individual will, his practical philosophy does not remain trapped inside the mind. It extends dramatically outward into a massive, rigorous framework of political, legal, and historical theory. In the metaphysics of morals, Kant transitions from internal ethics to external law through the doctrine of right, the Reich. He draws a sharp, unforgiving line between ethical duties and judicial duties. Ethics demands that you act from a pure internal motive. The law cares absolutely nothing for your internal motives. It concerns only your external actions. The universal principle of right dictates a procedural concept of justice. An action is just if it allows the external freedom of the individual to coexist with the freedom of everyone else under a universal law. You can obey the speed limit out of pure self-interest or a terrified fear of the magistrate, and the state remains perfectly satisfied. This rational necessity drives the creation of the civil state itself. Kant grounds the concept of property not in the mixture of human labor with the earth, as John Locke did, but in the necessity of practical reason to make use of the physical world. However, in a lawless state of nature, any claim to property is merely provisional, backed by nothing but unilateral brute force. To secure property is an absolute right. Practical reason issues an unconditional command. Humanity must exit the state of nature and enter a law-governed civil condition. Establishing a state is not a matter of historical convenience. It is a strict moral duty. For Kant, the original contract, that forms the state is an idea of reason, a normative standard used to judge the legitimacy of any law. He argues the only legitimate form of state is a republic, which requires the separation of executive and legislative powers and the principle of political representation. And this logic scales ceaselessly upward, just as individuals in a state of nature pose a constant threat to one another. Individual nation states exist in a global state of nature, posing the constant threat of war. In his visionary essay Toward Perpetual Peace, Kant argues that the exact same rational duty that compels individuals into a civil society compels nations to enter into a voluntary Pacific federation. His ultimate historical horizon is a cosmopolitan world order bound by international law, achieving perpetual peace not through utopian goodwill, but through the hard-won architecture of procedural justice. The engine of history, unsocial sociability. But if reason so clearly demands this cosmopolitan peace, why is the ledger of human history written in blood? How do we actually get from the brutal state of nature to the kingdom of ends? Kant addresses this paradox by identifying a hidden mechanism driving historical progress: unsocial sociability. The engine of our civilization is a fundamental contradiction burning within human nature. We have a profound inclination to live in society, knowing that only in community can we develop our capacities. Yet we simultaneously possess a pathological antisocial tendency, the desire to direct everything according to our own selfish will, to compete, to dominate, and to achieve status over our neighbors. Kant argues that this painful friction is exactly what nature intends. If human beings were perfectly peaceful, pastoral, and cooperative, our greatest capacities would lie dormant forever. It is our vanity, greed, and competitive antagonism that awaken us from laziness. The constant threat of our neighbors force us to invent, to produce, to fortify, and to sharpen our intellects. Eventually, the pain of this constant antagonism becomes unbearable. The very selfishness that drives human to war is the exact mechanism that ultimately forces them to establish mutual boundaries in the rule of law. Nature, in her dark wisdom, uses our worst vices to achieve our best outcome, forcing a pathological species into the moral corset of a civil constitution. Radical evil and the ethical commonwealth. To fully grasp the stakes of this progression, we must look squarely at the darkness Kant identified in his philosophy of religion. In 1793, his publication of Religion Within the Boundaries of Mere Reason provoked the Prussian censors by systematically dismantling orthodox theology and offering a chillingly rational translation of original sin. Kant diagnosed humanity with radical evil, das radikale Böse, or Bose. This does not mean we are biologically destined to commit heinous crimes. For Kant, evil is an administrative choice concerning the hierarchy of our inner maxims. A human being acts evilly when they knowingly subordinate the moral law of duty to the law of self-love and inclination. Because his propensity to prioritize self-interest is a conscious, universally adopted starting point, for human agency. It corrupts the very root, the radix of our will. Because this corruption is social, we inflame each other's vanity and greed through mutual competition. We can never achieve moral perfection in isolation. Overcoming radical evil requires a collective effort. Kant argues we must form an ethical commonwealth, an invisible church. Unlike the political state, which relies on the coercive force of police and prisons, this ethical commonwealth is a voluntary community bound together purely by shared moral devotion. In building this, Kant fiercely attacks religious orthodoxy, targeting what he calls priestcraft. He argues that attempting to win God's favor through statutory rituals, muttered prayers, church attendance, or the rote recitation of dogmas is a counterfeit service of God. It is a psychological evasion, a cowardly way of pretending to be holy without doing the agonizing, painful work of actually improving one's own moral character. True religion, Kant concludes, contains absolutely no duties to God other than the rigorous, uncompromising execution of our moral duties to our fellow human beings. We are left then as citizens of two worlds. We are biological organisms subject to the friction and antagonism of nature, yet we are also rational agents, the sovereign authors of the moral law. The journey from the solitary good will to the global cosmopolitan order is fraught with conflict, but it is guided by a compass that never wavers. Chapter 8: Freedom, the keystone of practical reason. How do we actually know that we are not merely biological machines running a highly complex but ultimately predetermined script written by our genetics and our environment? How do you know? Now, here we reach the absolute heart of Kant's practical philosophy, where that mere possibility bursts into luminous certainty. In the critique of practical reason, freedom is no longer a distant speculative hope. It becomes this indispensable keystone of the entire critical edifice. To grasp the magnitude of this shift, let us imagine a quiet moment of profound moral testing. Picture a person standing before a tyrant, offered a vast fortune to give false testimony that will ruin an innocent life. Every biological instinct, every calculation of phenomenal self-interest, and every psychological inclination screams at them to take the money and survive. Yet piercing through that cacophony is a silent, unyielding command. You ought not to do this. This imperative is not derived from past experience. It does not calculate outcomes. It addresses us directly as agents capable of heeding it, carrying a weight of apodictic necessity. Kant's philosophy underwent a profound and often misunderstood evolution to explain this exact moment. In his earlier groundwork of the metaphysics of morals, Kant attempted a theoretical deduction of freedom. He tried to prove that because we possess pure apperception, we must be members of an intelligible nominal world. Therefore, we are free, and because we are free, we are bound by the moral laws. But Kant, demonstrating an extraordinary intellectual honesty, soon realized that this argument violated the very limits he had established. We cannot theoretically prove our membership in the nominal realm because we have forbidden theoretical reason from making claims about things in themselves. And let's not get lost in the language here. We have not forbidden. It is forbidden. In the second critique, Kant abandons the attempt to prove freedom theoretically and performs a breathtaking reversal. He argues that our inescapable awareness of the moral law, the absolute ought, is simply a given. It requires no prior metaphysical proof. He names this immediate authoritative awareness the fact of reason. We do not first prove we are free and then figure out our duty. Rather, the consciousness of the moral law is the immediate, undeniable awareness of our own freedom to legislate for ourselves. To clarify this profound relationship, Kant employs two precise terms. The moral law is the ratio cognoscendi, the reason for knowing, of freedom. We only know we are free because we feel the absolute command of duty, which proves to us that we possess the capacity to overcome our biological programming. If we were not free, the command, thou shalt not, would be an absurd cruelty of nature. Conversely, freedom is the ratio incendi, the essence or ground of being of the moral law. Without actual spontaneous freedom, the moral law would be an empty phantom, a meaningless glitch in our psychology. The fact of reason serves as our absolute bedrock. We know we are morally obligated, therefore, we must be free. Freedom for Kant possesses both a negative and a positive dimension, and they are inextricably linked. Negatively, freedom is independence from sensible determination. It is our capacity to transcend the merely pathological causation of our appetites, a transcendence we first glimpsed as a mere logical possibility in the resolution of the third antinomy. Positively, freedom is autonomy, the will's supreme capacity to give itself universal law through pure reason alone. These are not two separate freedoms, but two sides of the same coin. As Kant observes in the groundwork, a free will and a will under moral laws are strictly one and the same. The categorical imperative is not an external command shouted from the heavens. It is the self-legislation of a free, rational being exercising its own sovereignty. Yet we must tread carefully. Kant insists that this is a practical, not a speculative knowledge. We do not theoretically comprehend how nominal freedom initiates phenomenal effects without breaking the laws of physics. We cannot place a moral choice under a microscope. We simply know with absolute practical certainty that we must act under the idea of freedom. Crucially, this does not mean we live as ghosts oscillating between two separate universes. Rather, we take two distinct standpoints toward ourselves. When we act as empirical scientists, we must view our bodies and behaviors as biological machines governed by the unbroken chain of phenomenal causality. But when we act as moral agents, we must view our wills as the free, autonomous authors of our own destiny. Here is the critical balance that achieves its fullest harmony. The severe limits exposed in the first critique actually protect human morality from being reduced to empirical psychology or chemical necessity. By securing freedom as our anchor, Kant ensures that the human person is never a mere thing to be used as an instrument for another's gain, but always an end to be respected. Chapter 9, Kant's Critical Project, Reason's Grand Blueprint. When a magnificent cathedral is finally completed and the scaffolding is stripped away, we are invited to step back and view the structure, not as a collection of isolated stones, but as a single breathtaking unity. We have moved from Kant's quiet awakening in Königsberg amid the crumbling dogmas of rationalism through the bold Copernican revolution that placed the active human mind at the very center of the knowable world. We witness theoretical reason carefully construct the realm of phenomena and humbly halt before the unknowable noumena. We then watch practical reason step forward in luminous certainty, revealing freedom as the keystone of moral autonomy. Now we must step back to survey the complete architecture Kant erected across his three great critiques. This critical project is nothing less than a profound refounding of human reason itself. It is a disciplined, serene mapping of what we can legitimately know, where we must humbly halt and how the diverse faculties of the human soul achieve a systematic unity that dignifies the whole of human experience. At the foundation of this edifice lies the Copernican turn. The mind is no mere passive tablet awaiting impressions from a mysterious reality beyond. It is the active architect shaping and structuring the phenomenal world. As previously mapped, this grand architecture relies on the triadic collaboration of sensibility, understanding, and reason. Sensibility provides the spatio-temporal gateway. The understanding legislates appearances via the categories and the schematism. And reason acts as the unrelenting seeker of systematic unity, driving the mind toward regulative horizons. However, as Kant surveyed this completion of his first two critiques, he recognized a massive, seemingly unbridgeable gulf in his architectonic. He had created two radically different legislative domains. On one side lay the realm of phenomenal nature, entirely governed by the mechanical determinism of the understanding, and on the other lay the realm of noumenal freedom, governed by the absolute moral law of practical reason. The crisis was immediate. How can moral freedom possibly ever actualize its purposes in a strictly mechanical world? When I make a pure nominal moral choice, how does it move my phenomenal arm to act in the physical universe without shattering the laws of physics? And to bridge this abyss, Kant authored his crowning synthesis, the Critique of the Power of Judgment. In the first critique, Kant utilized determining judgments where a universal rule like causality is already given and the mind simply subsumes a particular sensory event under it. But the third critique introduces reflecting judgments. Here only the particular empirical data is given, and the mind must actively search for a universal rule to make sense of it. We experience this profound bridging most acutely in two ways, through aesthetics and through biology. When we stand before a masterful painting or a breathtaking sunset, we experience beauty. Kant explains that in this moment, our faculties of imagination and understanding enter into a spontaneous free play of harmony. We feel a subjective yet universal, valid pleasure. This pleasure reveals a profound truth. Nature seems remarkably friendly to our cognitive faculties, organized as if it were designed for our minds to grasp it. Furthermore, when we experience the sublime, the overwhelming, crushing scale of a raging ocean or an infinite night sky, we are physically humbled, yet our rational being is elevated. The sublime reminds us that while nature can crush our fragile bodies, it holds absolutely no power over our autonomous moral will. Kant extends this reflecting judgment to the biological world. When we look at a simple blade of grass or the complex anatomy of a bird, the mechanical Humean billiard ball causation fails to fully explain its existence. In an organism, the parts exist for the sake of the whole, and the whole generates the parts. We are rationally forced to judge organisms as if they were designed with an internal purpose, a concept, Kant borrows from Aristotle called teleology. While we cannot theoretically prove that a divine architect designed the universe, reflecting judgment allows us to view the entire natural world as developing purposeful system. And if nature has an overarching purpose, Kant argues, its ultimate endpoint can only be the one entity capable of setting its own ends, the morally autonomous human being. The third critique thus seamlessly connects the cold mechanism of nature to the warm teleology of moral freedom. It allows us to view the physical world not as a hostile void, but as a hospitable theater for the realization of our highest moral duties. Chapter 10, The Open Horizons of Kant's System, Strengths, Vulnerabilities, and Enduring Questions. No human creation, not even one as monumental as Kant's critical edifice, is without its shadowed corners and open horizons. Before we step beyond Kant into the remarkable physiological convergences that await us in the modern era, let us pause in quiet reflection to examine this system from within. We must weigh its enduring strengths against its intrinsic vulnerabilities. This internal evaluation is no act of demolition, only by recognizing where a structure bears immense weight and where it leaves doorways slightly ajar. Only then can we fully grasp its achievement and understand why it detonated an intellectual explosion that fundamentally altered the trajectory of Western philosophy. Imagine a mirror of flawless clarity suspended in the center of a room, every object placed before it, every chair, every face, every beam of morning light. It all appears in the reflection with perfect regularity and mathematical precision. You can spend a lifetime studying the laws that govern the images in that mirror, mapping their exact spatial relationship and predicting their motions. And yet you can never turn the mirror around. Its polished face presents you with a world of appearances, but the dark, unpolished back, the condition that makes the mirror possible at all, it remains permanently hidden from your gaze, from your understanding. This is the most intimate and maddening frontier in all of modern philosophy. Immanuel Kant's distinction between the world as it appears to us and the world as it is in itself, and standing at that frontier, hammering against it with the fury of a disappointed believer, is Friedrich Henrik Jacobi. Kant's critical project rests on a double claim. He tells us that the certainties of mathematics and Newtonian physics are secure precisely because space, time, and the categories of the understanding are not features of a mind-dependent reality, but forms we ourselves supply. We can know nature with apodictic necessity because we are, in a profound sense, its legislator. Simultaneously, by limiting knowledge to the realm of appearances, the phenomenon, Kant carves out a protected space for human freedom, a nominal realm beyond the deterministic chains of natural causality. It is a brilliant balancing act in epistemology that underwrites sciences while salvaging morality. But the price of this balance is a permanent and agnosticism about what lies behind the mirror. And that price, Jacobi insisted, was far too high. The deepest discrepancies in the Kantian edifice appears exactly where Kant must lean his weight upon it. If the phenomenal world is a construction arising from the mind's own formal architecture, what accounts for the specific content of our sensations? Why this particular sensory manifold and not another? Kant's answers that our sensibility is affected by things in themselves, noumena that impinge upon our receptive faculty, providing the raw matter that our mental forms and shape into the objects of experience. Here, Jacobi struck with surgical precision. Causality, Kant had argued, is a category of the understanding, a rule that only has legitimate application within the spatio-temporal realm of appearances. To say that a noumenon causes a sensory affection is to apply a phenomenal concept to a relationship that supposedly transcends the phenomenal. In his famous 1787 appendix to David Hume on faith, Jacobi delivered the verdict that is echoed through 2 centuries of Kant scholarship. Quote, "Without that presupposition, I could not enter into the system, but with it, I could not stay within it." Close quote. The thing in itself is the door through which you must enter Kant's philosophy, and the very same door through which Jacobi insisted you must immediately flee. Modern scholarship has not resolved this tension. So much is inherited in 2 radically different registers. It is a mistake, though a common one, to bundle all contemporary interpreters into a single school. Paul Guyer and the late Henry Allison, 2 giants of Anglophone Kant studies, defended profoundly opposed understandings of what Kant actually meant. And their disagreement recapitulates the very problem Jacobi identified, while showing us how much is at stake in choosing a side. Guyer, in works like Kant and the Claims of Knowledge, argues that Kant genuinely committed himself to an ontology of distinct entities. On this reading, the noumenon is not a mere abstraction, but a real thing, a hidden substrate that exists in a realm separate from space and time, causally responsible for the appearances we experience. To put it bluntly, there are 2 worlds, a world of things that appear and a world of things that don't. For Guyer, Kant's numerous references to affection by things in themselves are not metaphorical or merely regulative. They are literal causal claims that, however problematic, are structurally indispensable to the system. If you take this interpretation seriously, Jacobi's objection cuts to the bone. Kant is using a phenomenal category to bridge 2 ontologically distinct domains, and the entire critical philosophy trembles on that illicit inference. Allison, in his landmark study, Kant's Transcendental Idealism in Interpretation and Defense, developed an entirely different defense. He urged us to abandon the 2-world picture altogether and replace it with what he called an epistemic condition, or 2-aspect reading. We do not inhabit 2 separate realities. There is one world, one set of objects, but we can consider those same objects in 2 irreducibly different ways, as they appear to us under the necessary conditions of human cognition, and as they are in themselves, independently of those conditions. Affection on this view is not a mysterious causal push but from a ghostly hinterland. It is simply the way we express the fact that our cognitive encounter with the world has a passive, receptive dimension, that we are finite knowers who do not create the givenness of what we encounter, even though we do shape it. Allison's reading dissolves much of Jacobi's force because it refuses to treat noumena as a separate set of objects that need to interact with appearances. The problem of a category transgressing its boundary evaporates when there is no boundary between two worlds, only a distinction between two ways of reflecting upon the one world we always already inhabit. Which reading is truer to Kant's text remains fiercely contested. But notice what this disagreement reveals. Jacobi's challenge did not kill Kantianism. It fractured it into competing research programs that each claimed to be its authentic heir. And that fracturing is the prologue to one of the most exuberant and wildly imaginative chapters in the entire history of Western thought. Once Jacobi had exposed the nerve, the generation after Kant set about rewriting the entire organism. Johann Gottlieb Fichte looked at the problematic noumenon, this unknowable something that supposedly grounds all knowing, and simply amputated it. If the thing in itself cannot be known, Fichte reasoned, then by what right do we speak of it at all? In his 1794 Wissenschaft des Lehre, which means like science education, he declared the noumenon a phantom of dogmatic thinking and transformed Kant's formal unity of apperception, the I think, that must accompany all representations, into an absolute self-positing ego. All of reality for Fichte is the striving activity of the I, generating the not I as a field for its own moral self-realization. The hidden of the back mirror has been forgotten or smashed. There is only the reflective activity itself, infinite and unbounded. Then came Friedrich Wilhelm Joseph Schelling, who found Fichte's exclusive focus on the subjective ego far too narrow, too claustrophobic. Nature cannot be merely the inert stage for moral struggle. In Schelling's philosophy of identity, the absolute is neither subject nor object, but the primordial unity from which both spring. Nature, he declared, is visible spirit. Spirit is invisible nature. The world of appearances is not a veil. It is the gradual unconscious awakening of the absolute itself, a process of cosmic self-expression that moves through minerals, plants, animals, and finally human consciousness. The noumenon has become a living, evolving ground that is not behind phenomena, but unfolding through them. It fell to Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel to complete this trajectory with a system of breathtaking ambition. For Hegel, Kant's separation of phenomenon and noumenon was the fundamental philosophical error, a self-imposed alienation of thought from reality. In this phenomenology of spirit, Hegel led consciousness on a dialectical pilgrimage, showing that every stage that what it took to be an inaccessible beyond was actually its own alienated activity. The thing in itself is not hidden. It is simply the truth of the whole process, the full self-consciousness of Geist, realizing that there is nothing outside of it to which it fails to correspond. Hegel transformed Kant's cautious epistemology into a massive historical ontology. Reality itself is the rational process of spirit coming to know itself, and the long travail of human history is the theater of this self-knowledge. The mirror, in the end, reflects nothing but its own act of reflecting, and that act is the absolute. Arthur Schopenhauer watched this idealist pageant with unconcealed contempt. He considered himself Kant's one true disciple, but what he extracted from Kant's noumena was darker than anything the idealists had conceived. Schopenhauer accepted the phenomenon-noumenon divide and insisted that uniquely we have an inner access to the thing in itself through our own embodied existence. That access reveals the noumena not as a rational God, not as a striving ego, not as absolute spirit, but as will, a blind, insatiable, irrational will that objectifies itself in all phenomena of the nature of the world. The world as representation is the veil of Maya. The world as will is a ceaseless tormenting hunger, a metaphysical malignancy that dooms all striving to suffering. In a single gesture, Schopenhauer stripped Kant's noumenal realm of all its moral architecture. For Schopenhauer, there is no God, no freedom as Kant understood it, no kingdom of ends, and filled it with the dark, pulsing energy of a cosmos that exists only to devour itself. This dizzying proliferation of systems, from Fichte's moral idealism to Hegel's absolute rationalism to Schopenhauer's cosmic pessimism, shows us just how generative Jacobi's crack in the Kantian edifice actually was. The thing in itself, far from being a sterile epistemological problem, became the burning center around which an entire century of metaphysics revolved. Each thinker trying to resolve the affection problem by reimagining the relationship between thought and reality more radically than the last. And then in the 20th century, a different retrieval began. The Anglo-American analytic tradition looked back at Kant and saw not a failed metaphysician, but a profound logician of our conceptual scheme. P.F. Strawson, in The Bounds of Sense, performed a careful surgery, extracting what he took to be Kant's enduring descriptive metaphysics. The structure of our conceptual framework, while discarding the transcendental psychology and the noumenon itself as excess baggage. Wilfrid Sellars, in his masterwork Science and Metaphysics, found in Kant a direct ancestor for his own critique of the myth of the given, the seductive but incoherent idea that there could be a direct, unconceptualized acquaintance with reality. Sellars saw clearly that Kant had already exposed this myth by arguing that intuitions without concepts are blind. The battle lines of mid-century epistemology were drawn in ink, invisible, until held up to Kant's flame. So the legacy before us is not a single monument, but a cracked and fractured and branching tree. Jacobi's piercing objection revealed the fault line. Geyer and Allison, in our own time, have given us the most sophisticated maps of the fault lines to irreconcilable readings. The idealists, intoxicated by the discovery that thought might absorb reality entirely, let the tree grow into wild and towering forms. The analytic tradition pruned it back to its logical roots, seeking a leaner, more defensible Kant. What no one has done, what perhaps no one can do, is to make the tree simple again. And yet, as we step forward now, a new and unexpected horizon begins to glow. Kant's pure forms of intuition, his categories, the mysterious unity of apperception, all of these were, in his own time, speculations about the necessary structure of any possible finite mind. What if they are not merely transcendental logic, but find a palpable resonance in the wet, electric lattice of the human brain? In the lectures to come, we will not reduce Kant to neurobiology, but we will dare to translate his pure reason into a new physiological key, illuminating his enduring insights with the cutting edge light of modern cognitive science. The mirror, it turns out, may have a biology after all, and its back may be more visible than Jacobi ever dreamed. Chapter 11. From the Critique to the Resurrection, the Unkillable System, and the Dawn of Physiosophia. Kant's edifice stands serene, inviting us onward. History, however, has tested serenity harshly, almost immediately after the Critique of Pure Reason appeared. Voices claimed to have shattered it from within. The earliest and most piercing came from Kant's own fellow townsman, Johann Georg Hamann, the Magus of the North. In his unpublished Metacritique of the Purism of Reason, 1784, Hamann insisted that Kant's celebrated pure reason was a mirage. Reason cannot be stripped of language, tradition, history, or faith. All thought is immersed in the concrete, the sensory, the divine gift of human speech. To pretend otherwise, Hamann charged, is self-deceptive abstraction. Kant offered no direct public reply. The Hamann problem, the inseparability of reason from its historical and linguistic embodiment, remained unresolved in his lifetime. It echoed through Herder's cultural particularity, Jacobi's leap of faith, and the romantic exaltation of feeling over analysis. Later, as existentialists renewed the assault, and 20th century movements, logical positivism, and A.J. Ayer's stark declaration that metaphysical statements are literally meaningless, Heidegger's attempt to overcome the subject-object divide and the hiddenness of the thing in itself, opened pathways that postmodern thinkers followed into subjective fragmentation, where meaning dissolves into power struggles and interpretive voids. The result for many was not liberation, but a profound estrangement, a world stripped of inherent dignity, leaving only contingency, corruption, and quiet despair. A seemingly decisive blow arrived from science itself. Stephen Hawking proclaimed in The Grand Design in 2010, quote, "Traditionally, these are questions for philosophy, but philosophy is dead. Philosophy has not kept up with modern developments in science, particularly physics," end quote. Neil deGrasse Tyson dismissed philosophy as a useless distraction that can really mess you up. Lawrence Krauss, while venturing into cosmological origins, earned rebuke for treating philosophy with contempt, reducing ultimate questions to empirical mechanics alone. Robert Sapolsky, tracing behavior to biology without remainder, concluded that free will, and with it, much of traditional moral philosophy, is just an illusion. Each voice announced philosophy's obsolescence, its replacement by the hard data of observation and experiment. The chorus of dismissal from cosmology to neuroscience seem to form an impregnable empirical wall around the old philosophical kingdom. One might emphasize that these scientists are, ironically, making all metaphysical claims after all. Materialism to argue against metaphysics. And yet, this is exactly the kind of transcendental illusion Kant warned about. Reason overstepping its bounds to claim it knows ultimate truth of matter. What if the very empirical discoveries meant to bury philosophy are quietly resurrecting its deepest intuitions? What if the measurable realities of 21st century inquiry do not dissolve Kant structures, but unexpectedly illuminate them, revealing patterns in nature that echo ancient wonders about the human place in the cosmos? The command to noci te ipsum, know thyself, carved above the temple of Apollo at Delphi, carried forward in Latin by Renaissance and Enlightenment thinkers, and given poignant English voice by Shakespeare and Hamlet. This, above all, to thine own self be true, and it must follow as the night, the day. Thou canst not then be false to any man. Kant took this injunction with utmost seriousness. His critical project is a rigorous inventory of the mind's necessary structures so that we might finally know the instrument with which we know all else. Scripture offers a bolder echo. When accused of blasphemy for claiming unity with God, Jesus replied in John chapter 10, verse 34, quoting Psalm chapter 82, verses 6, "Is it not written in your law, I said, ye are gods?" The words provoked rather than resolve, hinting at a glory within human nature that reason has long sought to clarify. Today, a new path opens for pursuing that ancient command, one that braids three strands into what I call Physiosophia. From physis, nature, and Sophia, wisdom, the wisdom disclosed by nature herself. Say it with me now. Physiosophia. Philosophy provides timeless questions and conceptual rigor. Physics, through lattice and field theoretic tools once forged to tame quantum and infinities. And biology, through precise observation of living systems. In this convergence, philosophy does not end. It finds unexpected resonance in the empirical world. The proclamations of its death prove perhaps premature. In the lectures ahead, we're going to explore these unexpected, these resonances, how certain enduring structures of experience find startling echoes in the natural world, and how the ancient aspiration to understand human dignity might yet find clearer expression through rigorous self-knowledge enriched by empirical insight. What if, for example, the brain's fundamental operating system, revealed by neuroscience, mirrors the synthetic a priori structuring of time and space? The doorway ahead is not veiled in shadow, but an illuminating invitation, in part to the death and resurrection of philosophy. We are up against a formidable modern chorus of dismissal. We will confront a contemporary landscape where science has seemingly formed an impregnable empirical wall around the old philosophical kingdom. In the upcoming lectures, we will braid together philosophy, the mathematical tools of physics, and the precise observations of biology. You will see how the exact methodologies of lattice field theory, originally forged to tame the explosive infinities of the quantum vacuum, are now being adapted to map the spiking networks of the human brain. Most astonishingly, we will discover how Kant's deduced a priori forms are not ghostly ideals, but measurable physiological realities. We will explore the medial entorhinal cortex, where grid cells fire in a flawless, mathematically optimal hexagonal lattice, biologically instantiating Kant's pure intuition of space. We will track the rhythmic theta frequency oscillations that sweep through the brain, serving as the biological metronome for Kant's inner sense of time. We have mastered the philosophical blueprint. Well, at least we've tried. Now we step into the laboratory to witness the biological priesthood of metaphysical physiology. And I will see you in part 2.